Is joint pain or stiffness affecting your quality of life? I personally suffered from knee and lower back pain from my training and hobbies. Since I started taking a scoop of Native Path's collagen every day, I noticed a significant improvement in my joint health. I am able to do more things I enjoy with those I love and care about. I personally recommend everyone try Native Path's collagen for joint recovery and for a variety of other health benefits. Native Path has generously offered all of our listeners 15% off by simply entering the code AISA15 at checkout. That's code AISA15 for 15% off your entire purchase. All of Native Path's products are high purity, organic, grass-fed, and clean. So check out all of the great products they have available at their website, nativepath.com.
So you said you started keto and carnivore, or you're on that? How long have you been doing that, Jack? I'm really interested by that.
I've always been a fan of the concept of low carb, but I always found it very difficult to sustain. Like I would lose a lot of weight and then it's kind of boring and then you get hungry and what have you. And when I learned about keto, I guess it was about 2 years ago, and I'd gone back up on the weight train and I was probably close to 300 pounds. Mm-hmm. And I'm about 210 now. And I'm kind of a guy that, about 210 is where I'm going to be. Wow. Someday I might get down in that 200-pound range. But when I got out of the Army, I was U.S. Army airborne soldier. I was 22 years old when I got out of the Army, and I weighed 192 pounds then. Mm-hmm. Yep. So I'm not a guy that's going to be 168 like the government says I'm supposed to be or whatever. So I look at it as it saved my life. If you can go back and find some old videos of me from more than a couple of years ago, you can see the difference is pretty amazing. People tell me I look younger now than I did 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. It was the missing piece for me. Mm-hmm. It always made sense that like our our ancestors could not have lived on a high carbohydrate diet. Mm-hmm. If you put me in a survival, like traditional woodland survival situation, I have to use the skills I have out there. I'm going to eat things with a face, because it's the most nutrient I can get with the least amount of effort possible. Right. Yep. And it's the most consistent. You could put me in a jungle or a swamp in Georgia somewhere, and you can just go away. I'll be fine. You can come back in 6 months, right? I will not go hungry, but I'm going to be eating swamp rabbits and snakes and alligators, right? Because that's the easy layup. And that's what, mankind did. But what was missing, because I kind of took the book by the Doctors Eads, the protein power plant. I kind of took that approach. It was similar to Atkins, and it was relatively low in fat. And that was, you were never satiated. And when I found keto and I found like, eat all the fat you want. No, really, go ahead, do it. Like just, not with a donut. It was ridiculously easy, and it was ridiculously easy to do. But I fell into the trap a lot of people do, like, well, how do I make keto bread? You don't need keto bread. Don't make keto. Don't make freaking egg meringue and call it bread. Just take the steak, throw it in the pan, brush it with some rosemary and butter at the end, and eat it. Like, just do that. And that kind of led me eventually to where I'm not a carnivore diet person at this point. I would say like I'm like 90, 95%. Like when we're done with this interview, I've got some beef tips that are in a little mini crock pot simmering away there that I'll be eating. I'll go out to one of my systems and I'll cut some Asian mustard greens and some arugula and throw it in there and wilt it down. And that's about as close as I've got. And I like to have something else, my diet. Or the other thing I'll do, I'll use nuts a lot of times, like that particular little thing of stew. Basically, I have I took like 8 almonds and chopped them up and threw them in there. It's really a unique kind of Moroccan thing going on. But that's like mostly what I eat now is meat. As Ken Berry says, beef, butter, bacon, and eggs. Like that is the core of what I eat.
I'm a huge fan of Ken Berry. I noticed you had a few interviews with him recently, and how'd you get connected with him? And what have you taken away from him? What's he said that's resonated with you? What have you learned from him?
It's kind of a unique story how we ended up crossing paths, and I didn't know this till I had him on the show the first time, like 4 or 5 years ago. Back when Ken was, in his own words, a fat bad doctor.
Yep.
He would drive. He had a pretty good drive to his office. He's from rural Tennessee, and he had a pretty good drive to his office every day. He actually found my podcast, started listening to it back then. And he just kind of became a fan of my show. And along the way, he finally decides, like, he said he was telling his patients things like, look, you need to back off the food and get in a little bit better shape and all. And they'd be eyeballing his belly. Mm-hmm. And like, kind of like, really, doc, you know, and like, he kind of had a come to Jesus moment that he had to figure out what was wrong with medicine as a whole. And that led to his book, Lies My Doctor Told Me. And right after he came out with that book, he ended up coming on the show to promote the book. And that was when he told me he was a listener. I didn't know who he was yet. He had not blown up. And right about after that was his wife told him, you know what, with all this stuff you're doing and talking about, you should have a YouTube channel. So he looked at that wonderfully smart woman and said, well, that's stupid, right? He literally told her that was stupid, but then he did it anyway, because we listened to our wives. And of course, he's blown up. He's got like 1.7 million YouTube subs or whatever now. But that's how we kind of crossed paths. And I think the number one thing that he said that stuck with me the most in that, like, this 5-year relationship, we just had that workshop I talked about. He was actually here for that. He taught at it.
That was a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yeah, it was a couple of weeks ago. We had like 90 people on my property. There's no more room for any more people on my property than that. But he did a presentation. It is on my channel. You can go watch it. And what happened was, I was at a distance from the board, and I wear glasses, so I couldn't really see it. And I saw a master and slave in like this line, like this bell curve line. And I thought it was one of our solar engineers talking about, you know, master and slave in electronics or something. And I get closer, and he was getting ready to do his presentation. Like me, he can't draw fast, so he had to pre-do the whole whiteboard up. And he said, you know, the diet that they recommend for you that's based on grain historically is the diet of the slave.
Yep.
And the diet that I'm recommending, which I love, he stopped calling it keto. He calls it the proper human diet, because that way, but what about this? Are you a human? Yeah, then you should eat the proper human diet, right? This is the diet of the master. So think back to all the great empires that had slavery in it, like the Roman Empire and whatever. Like, you didn't want your slave to be able to run away. Right. We were talking about my Achilles injury. Like, the Romans literally would cut one of the Achilles tendons of a slave because you'd adapt and you could walk, but you couldn't run. Like, so you didn't have the best interest of your slaves at heart. And then all of this mythology around you shouldn't eat meat or whatever. This was always a system of, like we talked about earlier, of control. Wow. And when he put it that way, I'm like, you know, I can talk to people day and night about what it was like in 10,000 BC. Mm-hmm. And that if you were a man or woman living in North America in 10,000 BC, and there were sloths walking around, you know, that were bigger than a half of a house, you'd figure out how to kill that and eat that, because it was easy. But putting it that way, I think, actually makes it a little bit more tangible for people. What did we traditionally feed the slave, right? And then what did the king, what did the noble traditionally eat? You know, like in England, you know, during medieval times, it was a hangable or have your head chopped up with a hatchet offense to kill one of the king's deer. Mm-hmm. Now think about that. So do you think he wanted them as pets? Or do you think it's what he fed the royal court with, right? Why was it so protected as a resource? That had a pretty big impact for me.
Oh, it's interesting you brought up the master and slave thing. I don't know if you remember, there was a movie a couple years ago, Game Changers. There was a vegan movie promoting veganism. But they mentioned in there that they brought up the Roman gladiators as like these pinnacles of like strong men, you know, battling it out in the arena and whatever, and talking about how they lived on a diet of grains, forgetting the fact that the gladiators were the slaves in that in that society.
And you know what?
They're just fed garbage, you know?
So we have this like romanticism in our minds that like the gladiators were like the MMA guys of today that were training and they were the best of the best. Bullshit. Why would I take my best soldiers and put them in an arena and have them kill each other for entertainment purposes? Because if I did that, right, I have these two great guys. They're going to go to battle with sword or spear or net or whatever. In the end, one of them's dead.
The other one's probably injured.
If they're good soldiers, if they're my leaders, if they're my guys that are in the best shape, I just lost one of them I can't fight the Carthaginians with.
Right.
It's the most retarded argument. These were sacrificial, worn out men and there probably were some good ones that for like, and then you sent the guy that ate the grain to get killed. Like it's bred in circuses, right?
Yep.
It literally was bred in circuses. And And grain was, you want to talk about that time, grain was a system of control. If you were a Roman citizen, you had a daily allotment of grain that you were given. It was like the original welfare to just exist. Like nobody was going to starve. Everybody got their gruel. But I guarantee you, Caesar, Caesar wasn't living on grain. Caesar was, dumping olive oil on the lamb, right? I mean, and it's just the history of the world. You can look at it and you can always see that. And if you look even like one of the most sustainable societies ever created was a system of control. Edo, Japan, that period there, the normal person pretty much ate nothing but rice. I mean, that was like the main thing that people ate was rice. And but the emperors and the samurai class, they all ate meat. They were the only ones that were allowed to have animals. They were the only ones that were allowed to have meat. And so it's there. It's in Roman history. It's in Greek history. It's in English history and European history. It's always been the case that the nobles knew that they were better off eating meat, not just because it tasted better, because it made them healthier. And then, to be fair, even the people that were living on grain back then, they weren't eating trans fats and high fructose corn syrup and all this other stuff. They were at least eating, bad food, but not
the worst.
Not the worst of the worst, right?
I
was looking for a word,
food.
like not toxic. I'm going, oh, it's totally toxic. And I just had this discussion last night on another show. If you think about wheat, there is no benefit to wheat for us to eat.
I wanted to interrupt this amazing podcast with a brief message about one of our sponsors, Lombardi Chiropractic in Oneida, New York. Nearly 65 million Americans report suffering from back pain, and I used to be one of them. I found Dr. Pete 8 years ago due to my continual back discomfort and pain. As an active athlete and someone who likes to play hard, I was frustrated when my sessions in the gym started to regress, my sleep went downhill, and I had no idea why. After a comprehensive evaluation by Dr. Pete's team, I was given a detailed treatment plan that I followed to the T. After 3 months of care, my body felt amazing. As a coach, I understand that if you don't maintain your abilities, you will lose it. And the last thing I wanted to do was lose the great progress I had made. I have used Dr. Pete as my personal chiropractor for the last 8 years and attribute much of my physical abilities and overall health to his approach with chiropractic care. The good news is, Lombardi Chiropractic is offering a 50% discount on the initial exam and x-rays to all new members that mention the A is A Health podcast. So stop trying to self-diagnose and save yourself time and money by visiting lombardichiropractic.com and schedule your initial consultation today.
Right? It doesn't benefit. Like if you eat an apple and you're really hungry, so you eat the core, and this is, 10,000 years ago, you're going to probably go take a dump in the woods somewhere, and you've just planted an apple tree. You've literally fertilized and planted it. Wheat, if you eat wheat, it doesn't propagate that way. So what's the benefit to a grain being eaten by a human? There isn't one. So what do all life forms do? They seek to propagate themselves, to not be killed. So anything that harms you when you're a life form is a predator. And I believe all life has some form of innate intelligence. And that's why we develop things like toxins so that we won't be consumed, whether it's like a monarch butterfly's caterpillar eats milkweed. And then when a blue jay tries to eat it, the blue jay hacks up the monarch because it's toxic to it, that everything does that. Well, there's tons of anti-nutrients and toxins in grain, toxic to the human species. And if you think that grain is a valid food, I'm sorry. I have an experiment for you to do, but I don't suggest you actually do it. Do this as a thought experiment. Go out in a wheat field, get a bunch of wheat right off the stalk in your hand, right? Don't thresh it and process it and sprout it first and grind it into flour. Just take it and pitch it in your mouth like it's a handful of almonds. You're going to choke to death. It's going to go down into your throat. You're immediately going to have a gag reflex trying to get it out. And it's got little barbs on it that will hook into your throat where you can't get it out because it's like that grain's like, I'll give my life for my sister grains, right? It will literally kill you. And if you go through all this crap that we go through, it will kill you slower. Yep. And if you use things like sourdough and fermentation, it'll kill you even slower. It makes it less bad. It's still not what you should base your diet on.
Absolutely. People forget that plants fight back.
Yeah. Let's just start randomly eating shit and see what happens. If you just start walking through a forest and randomly eating crap, it won't take you long before you'll fall over.
It's funny you mentioned that because I'm watching right now on Netflix the show Alone. Have you seen that, Jack?
I've heard of it. It's one of those ones that everybody tells me, you got to watch it. No, I'm not big into Hollywood, but.
Well, I'm not either at all. Like Andy knows, I don't even watch TV hardly, but Jack, this is good. So they dropped 10 participants off in the Arctic.
Is this the one where the guy killed the muskox?
Yeah.
I've heard about that one.
So when we're talking about food and the carnivore and keto and stuff, so they have 10 supplies. They have really no resource other than what's in nature. And so there were some of the participants that thought that they could get by just on berries and like mushrooms and, these lichens and all this stuff. And they made it about 2 weeks and they lost like 25 pounds. And they were like, they had brain fog and they were tipping over. And then there was other people that in those 2 weeks, they caught 30 fish. Yeah. And they were doing fish head soup and getting all that healthy omega-3 fats and protein, and they were thriving. And then you've got Roland, the savage, that just kills this 800-pound muskox with a knife. And it was just awesomely beautiful in a sick way. But they're thriving on tons of protein and fats. Yeah. And it was really interesting to see the dichotomy between how the body responded with that,
Well, and what you'll notice is the further you move from the tropics, north or south, the more true that becomes.
Sure.
If you're in the tropics, you might find a freaking fig tree that's big and round as this room I'm sitting in. They're literally figs that get that big, and they're wild figs. They're not like cultivated ones. And when they drop, they'll drop tons of figs. And once a tribe figures out, hey, we can dry these things, you have an unlimited source of sugar. You might have that in the tropics. As you get out of the tropics, first you go through like where I live in Texas, where everything tries to bite you, sting you, or kill you. Right. And it doesn't rain and then you get into the temperate climates, but the more temperate, the less native fruits and things that you have. And they're very seasonal. Yeah. And when people say, well, it's all natural, what's natural about, a tomato? There's nothing. No, we made the tomato into what it is. Without man, the tomato would still be a little bitter yellow fruit that grew in the desert. Right. Or if you've ever picked wild blackberries and raspberries, they're delicious, but they're small. Yeah. And you get this, blackberries were huge when I was a kid. Go pick the blackberries. You had 2 weeks. 2 weeks and they were gone. Blueberries were big.
Yeah, we do that here. We go to the state lands and we pick blackberries. Yep. And they are much smaller, and you only have 10 weeks to 2 days, and then the birds eat them. They're gone.
They're gone. Or I grew up in Pennsylvania, so I'm kind of in your backyard up there, blueberries, wild strawberries. There was we would get groups together to go do it and then split them up. But I mean, you'd have all these people out there doing this all day long, and we had a car, right, or a truck, and you'd come home with 3 quarts of blueberries. Well, that's not that much carbohydrate for a year. So I believe that's pretty analogous to how things probably worked back then. But you go out and you shoot a deer, and you've got, especially a northeastern deer, you might have 90 pounds of meat out of it, and that time they didn't ask the game warden for another tag. When you needed another deer, you went and got another deer. And I think the reason this diet works is because it's species appropriate. And, you asked earlier about what Ken says and the most impactful things. The other thing was there's no such thing as an obese animal on a species appropriate diet. Yep. So the lion doesn't have calories to count, right? And people say, well, the lion's running around all the time. No, they're not. They sleep, right? The lion gets up, it wants a wildebeest, it goes out, lets its scent drift down, makes the woman kill it. And it comes in and takes the most valuable fatty shit, the liver and the pancreas and all that. The male comes and takes that away and lets the rest of the pride have whatever's left. And when he wants another one, he goes and but he's not fat. Or if you look at an animal we think of as fat, they're not fat for an elephant has a lot of fat on it, but it's not obese. It looks the way an elephant's supposed to look. It doesn't say, oh, I better not have another bite of this thing, right? It just eats what it wants. And when you get into this diet, as y'all, I guess, know, you get into a point where you stop worrying about calories. And I do differ with Ken on that a little bit. if you have a carbohydrate addict like I was, and they're coming off that, and if they're not going to go full carnivore out of the gate, which is hard for some people to do, if they're going to actually like count net carbs and all that, and they're going to, you know, use these certain like keto products and all, you better be at least restricting your calories at first, because you will end up not staying true to the diet. But I think if you eat things with a face only, I can't gain weight by doing it. Whenever I put a couple pounds on, it's because I had a couple extra drinks that week. You know, I mean, I dare you to gain weight on ribeye, and only ribeye. I dare
think
you.
it's pretty much impossible to gain weight on a keto or on a carnivore diet for sure.
I mean, if you are gaining weight, you should. But the people that do, like, I have a friend of mine, he's like 130 pounds soaking wet, and he's gone on keto, and he's done some testosterone therapy too. And he put like 20 pounds on in the last year. But he's normalizing his healthy weight. Yeah, it's all muscle. Like, I don't think you can gain fat eating ribeye. I dare you to do it. And if you do, it ain't going to be, then again, you might have a person that needs a little fat, right? There are people where their fat is too low. And my last thing on this, if y'all want to talk about something else so we don't turn it all keto, is, you know, there is no such thing as an essential carbohydrate, right? If I lock either of y'all in my closet over here, and I go in there every day and I throw you 2 ribeyes raw, and you have to just eat them, what's going to happen is you're going to go through fasting periods and all. You're going to get stronger. You're going to get smarter. You're going to start thinking. You're going to get more clearly, and you're going to figure out how to chokehold me when I come back with one of those ribeyes and get away. But you're not going to die. And if I feed you nothing but carbohydrates, absent any protein or fat, or absent protein or fat, I can give you protein and carbs or fat and carbs, but I take away either of those other 2 macros, you will die.
Wow.
You will die with 0 protein. You will die with 0 fat. This is medical fact. You can never eat a carbohydrate for your entire life, and you can live a healthy life. And that should be the end of the discussion, in my opinion.
We want to thank Suttmeyer Law Firm for being a podcast show sponsor. Suttmeyer Law Firm has worked with numerous clients within our community for years, and they couldn't come more highly recommended. They offer legal advice and representation for a range of residential and commercial real estate law issues. Are you buying a house, refinancing, having mortgage problems, or contract disputes? The team at Suttmeyer Law Firm can guide you through these processes. As a special offer to our listeners, they are offering a free consultation when you mention the A is A Health Podcast. Visit their website at suttmeyerlaw.com or call 315-363-7777 today.